How did you, some people again maybe listening to this, they might have children. They're thinking, how am I going to bring these children out of school? How am I going to teach them? And I know you weren't a teacher, and stuff that you learned. So, what advice would you give someone who's listening to that and thinking, or perhaps they have a partner who doesn't have the same thought process as actually making it happen yourself? What advice would you give them?
Okay, so the first thing is, I suspect that some of your listeners, the thought that might be going through their head is this guy completely and utterly irresponsible to take a 2-year-old on a boat around the world? And I understand that question. So the answer to that is that 5 years we had 5 years preparing to do this, and we have this standing joke in our family that if it was down to me, nothing would ever get finished. If it was down to my wife, nothing would ever get started. So she is the detailed planner in our world. So for the final 3 years before we went, whenever you saw her, she had this file underneath her arm with these countless spreadsheets going through every single scenario you could imagine and putting in place all the training you need to do that. So we trained to become ship's doctors, and we went through the whole education thing. We spoke to the schools, and we got the whole education program sorted out. So it's literally thinking through every different scenario. So, if anyone is thinking about, what do I want to do, then the thing is sort of talking with your partner, getting really clear on what excites both of you, because this has to be a shared story. It can't be something that one person wants and the other person doesn't want. And so it's just finding what you share in common, creating a story around that, and then I would say put a date in the diary when you want to make stuff happen by, but then you have to get down to that really detailed level of planning, and you won't be able to answer all the questions in one go, and we had to chunk it down to go and do it. So lots of planning and lots of attention to detail to make sure that it does happen. So.
Now, if you were starting again, and you may well be doing other things, I'm sure, but if you were starting again and taking this experience you had both from the business, from Trovus, but also obviously your adventures, what's the one thing you would say to yourself if you were starting it again and starting that business tomorrow? What would you do?
Surround myself by amazing people, find what each person loves doing, find their purpose. I always talk about find that thing that sets your soul on fire, right? And get people doing that thing that they love. And actually, I've got an analogy for that. So we're sitting here with Columbus, my son, and so I'll tell a story about education, which links back to this. So when we were homeschooling on the boat for the first 3 months, I remember sitting down trying to teach Columbus about the Tudors and the kings and queens of England. And I remember coming down to the saloon table, and after about an hour, there was still a blank sheet of paper, and the pen hadn't moved across the page. And it's like, okay, we need a different approach. Mm-hmm. So put the books to one side and said, Columbus, what are you interested in? And he said, I'm really interested in fishing. So we got the fishing books out, and so within days Columbus would know all about the different fish. We then started catching fish. He's now writing up his journal. He's drawing beautiful pictures. We're measuring the fish, we're weighing the fish, we're dissecting them. He sets up a business making and selling fishing lures. So his learning rate just literally went through the roof because he was engaged with doing it. Mm-hmm. Same principle in business. For every person in your team, what's the thing that really switches them on and gets them inspired and they love doing? That will leave gaps in the business. Mm-hmm. That's fine. You then recruit and fill for those gaps. But it's just unlocking what really gets everybody flying along. So that thing there.
Well, I'd love just to know just a interesting basic detail on the day-to-day on the boat. I saw one of your pictures in the book about your shopping trip, for example. Yeah. Now, I remember when I was backpacking around the world, I had to shop with 10 other people on a backpackers thing. It was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. We got way too much and it was crazy. How do you even manage that? Because I've seen like hundreds of supermarket bags in the boat. Tell us about that.
Lots of planning. Lots of planning. So, so I actually sailed around the world in 2000 on what was called the world's toughest yacht race, the BT Global Challenge. And back then I was in charge of food for the whole boat. So I had to get food for 18 people for 40 days. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of planning, a lot of spreadsheets, working out different meal plans. So you work out a 7-day meal plan, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. So same principle, that we would be at sea this time for 3 weeks at a time. We'd come up with the list of all the different things that we wanted. So I remember before we went going to the supermarket and going buying 40 kilos of pasta, 40 kilos of rice, and slabs and tins of baked beans and different sauces and things like that. But you've got to have interesting food that everybody wants to eat, because once you've been at sea for 2 weeks and suddenly everybody's like getting on each other's nerves for whatever reason, then it's really good to have nice food that everybody wants.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of baking on board, so every day we baked fresh breads, and we caught lots of fish, so we had lots of fresh sushi and sashimi and stuff like that. So it's
fantastic.